Welcome to the Living a Nordic Life podcast, where we explore a simpler, cosier and more intentional life the Nordic way. I'm Fiona McKenna, your Nordic living guide and founder of Living a Nordic Life, where I share all things Nordic living and show you that a Nordic life is the way to bring intentional calm and healthy habits into your own life, wherever you are in the world. Are you looking for ways to bring simplicity, coziness and calm into your life? Well, let me show you how. Visit the Living a Nordic Life website to explore how I can help you on your journey to simple, healthy and happy calm, the Nordic way. You can subscribe to the podcast right here. And if you want regular inspirational emails sent with love from Norway and straight to your inbox, don't forget to subscribe to the Living a Nordic Life newsletters. And so now let's dive into our episode. Hello! Today I am talking to Eric Stavney of Nordic on Tap podcast. Eric is a journalist who writes for the Norwegian American News, amongst a lot of other things, and he's incredibly knowledgeable about everything Nordic. And he really taps into his Nordic heritage to bring his stories to life. In my opinion, his work really shines on his podcast, Nordic on Tap, where he talks about subjects like folklore and culture and traditional music, and he takes it a step deeper by interviewing interesting and inspiring people, the kind of people that you and I would love to talk to, but we don't have the contacts or we don't know how to approach them. And these are people who we may never have heard of otherwise, but Eric finds them. But they have really wonderful, incredible things to say and share with the world. So, over to Eric. Hi.
I am Eric Stavney. I live in or near Seattle, Washington in the USA. I do a number of things, but one that's dear to my heart is a podcast, which I put together about once a quarter, once every 3 months. And that has enabled me to, among other things, tell folk tales. I really enjoyed reading folk tales to my children, and of course, they're long gone. Although they come back and say, Dad, where's that big collection of those folk tales? I want that.
Oh,
So,
that's brilliant.
yeah. So I was so astonished. I thought, okay, I'm doing this for myself. I'm just kind of making myself feel good. I'm just to read some folk tales, add some sound effects. And consistently, those are out of 35 programs, those are in the top. The four folk tales are the top four in terms of most listened to around the world. So
That's interesting. That shows how interested people are in it, and it's being lost a little bit, isn't it? Unless you pass that down, or you read it specifically, it might not be something that you necessarily learn about. But tell us, what is a folk tale? What makes a folk tale? What makes it folklore?
the folk tales, the people who study these things, they differentiate them from others, although I sort of put them together. Folk tales, in my mind, could include fairy tales, which are pretty fantastic and made to entertain. They could include legends, which are stories about something that did happen or could have happened, often have real people in it, and locations. And then there's mythology. Usually there's creation stories included in that. And it's, Odin and Thor and things of that nature. And then there are various other types of stories, fables, parables. So I take folktales to mean entertaining stories, but also stories meant to celebrate our cultural heritage, to remind us of our values, and like Aesop's fables, to teach children right and wrong.
So you really specialize in, or your expertise is Nordic folk tales, isn't it?
Yes, and I'll be honest, since I have Norwegian heritage, I love the folk tales from Asbjornsen and Moe, who collected those. The Brothers Grimm are okay, but they're not quite Nordic.
No, they're not, and they can be a little dark, can't they? Although some Norwegian folk tales can be fairly dark, I have to say.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And it's interesting looking the ones in different countries, Sweden and Finland and Iceland, and what flavor each of those has. Yeah, certainly Norwegian folk tales have a lot of connection to nature,
Yeah.
to the mountains, to the sea, and that kind of gives them their very unique flavor. Mhm.
Do you find that there's a similarity between them within the different countries, or are they very different?
They're not very different. So I'll, to be fair, Scandinavia has Germanic roots.
Mm,
So it's no surprise that a lot of the tales from down south, made it up to Scandinavia. Um, and a lot of the countries have close to the same folk tales, but I think it was Asbjornsen argues in one of his folktale books that they published around the mid 1800s. He argues that Norwegian folktales are absolutely distinct.
yeah.
And I'm not. I go, "Oh, okay, all right. Maybe there's more trolls. There's more mountains. There's more things about out the sea." And they also wrote them down in Norwegian in a time when you're supposed to write in Danish, or you're supposed to write in Latin, you're supposed to write in other literary languages, French.
Oh, that's interesting to hear. So, why do you think it's important to keep them alive? I mean, they could easily kind of peter out, couldn't they? I mean, what's the importance of making sure that we're passing these stories on?
Yeah, and another feature of folktales I didn't mention is that
Yeah.
it's an oral tradition,
Yes.
right? And
Mm.
and yes, you can read them, but there's something special about passing them on. I try to convince people that they should be folktale tellers. That does a lot for them, as well as so they build community. They they mirror us. They mirror our values. They mirror our community. They remind people in a nice way, I think, how to conform and stay within the limits of what's polite, what's ethical, things of that nature. So I think they're really important in reminding ourselves about our cultural heritage and in building community.
So these are the lessons that they're teaching us. So they weren't just stories, really. There was
That's
more depth
right.
to it.
That's right. There's quite I could name a number of lessons, but and those kinds of things are also universal in folk tales around the world.
Mm.
Um, like there's, Carl, I like Jungian psychology. He would argue that, folk tales have archetypes in them, these universals that someone from any culture would recognize, characters, situations, locations, things like that.
Yeah, so it transcends borders, really.
It does, and language.
Yeah. So how would you suggest that somebody brought these traditions into their life if they maybe wanted to get back in touch with their cultural heritage and they didn't live in the
Yes.
Nordics? But these things are important, aren't they, to keep us in touch with our roots? How can we keep it alive even if we're not living in Scandinavia?
Well, I really like some of the things that you do on your podcast and website. You don't just talk about a tradition or a holiday. You link the foods that you eat during those times. You remind people of the words in Nordic languages that are associated with it. Sometimes you point to the old calendars, how important it was to keep track of the seasons. A lot of this, I mean, if we go way back, it's connected to our very survival. If
Yeah.
you didn't keep track of winter or summer or midsummer, or you didn't know when to plant, you didn't know when to forage, That was really important. If you didn't know the stages of human life, what's special around birth, what's special around, you know, partnering up, I'll call it marriage.
Yep.
What's special about when you get old, and what's special about death. So we need to remember that. And traditions and rituals are really important in reaffirming who we are, but also they reaffirm if you're listening to this, we're saying, and you basically agree or like what you're hearing, we're saying you belong to us. This is us. And belonging is a basic human need. So I think folk tales in a world that is increasingly divisive and chaotic, and us and them. You hear a
Yeah.
lot of that language
Yeah.
these days. This pulls people in.
That's a lovely way of putting it. I really like that. That inclusivity within a group. It's
One,
great.
one of my favorite poems, it's just a short thing that actually I
Mm.
heard from the pulpit. um, uh, he drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that brought him in.
That's lovely, isn't it?
It is. I like it.
So tell me about some of your favorite folk tales, your favorite folklore. What really speaks to you? What speaks to you about your traditions that are important and the things that you talk to your kids about or have talked to your kids about?
Yes. I really like those tales that connect with nature in some way or
Mm.
something outside of your life. One of my favorites is Per, Paul, and Espen Askeladd. Espen is sort of the regular universal male hero that is in a number of tales. And his main thing that makes him great among many things is his curiosity.
Yeah.
And this tale addresses that curiosity. And he goes out with his brothers. They're supposed to go find their fortune in the world and they're going to make their way to the castle. But Espen keeps hearing things out in the woods. He says, "Is that somebody chopping wood up there? What is that chopping?" And the brothers go, "Guys, they're just chopping down a tree. Don't waste time with that." He says, "No, I gotta go." So he takes off through the woods. He does, "See you. I gotta find this out." And he gets up there and there's this axe all by itself chopping on a tree. I mean, there's nobody swinging it. And the axe talks to him and says, I've been here a long time waiting for you. So he takes the axe and puts it in his pack, and his brothers say, "What was that up there? What was that we were hearing up there?" And Espen just says, "Oh, it was just an axe we heard." And that's all he says. So there's another, things come in threes and a lot of fairy tales, or in sevens, but he also hears a pick, like a miner's pick, and he goes up and finds the pick and says, "Oh, I see you're picking." And the pick says, "I've been here a long time waiting for you." So he takes the pick, and let's see, the last one was he follows a stream. By this time the brothers are, you, you're a nutcase. We're not going to wait for you. So he follows the stream. He just says, "I wonder where this comes from." They're just like doing a face palm. I can't. Haven't you ever seen water coming out of a spring? Yeah, well, yeah, but I want to know what this. So he follows the stream up, and there's this little walnut out of which the water's coming out, is singing, as it says in the story, bubbling and singing. And of course, he says, "Well, I see you're, bubbling and singing." And the walnut says, "Yeah, I've been here bubbling along, waiting for you." So he picks up the walnut, puts moss in it. And so he has these three things. And when they get to the castle, So he has these three things because he was curious, he
Mm.
was adventurous, he was willing to talk to something that you and I would probably be so freaked out. I don't think I could, what I got better get out of here. This axe is just flying around in the air. And he acts like this is just something maybe not normal, but it's to be expected about nature. I think there's stand-ins for nature. I think there's stand-ins for strangers. Uh, and when they get to the king's castle, the goal is for the half the kingdom and the princess, you have to chop it down, this big oak tree. You have to dig a well, and uh, I think there's three things. And of course, no one else can do it. You chop into the oak tree and it grows twice as bigger.
Mm.
Keeps getting thicker and thicker and thicker. So his brothers try it. Of course, they can't do it. So he takes out his axe, and the axe just chops the heck out of it, and down it falls. And he takes the second one was to make this well that water could be available all year round. He takes out his pick. The pick digs the well, and then he climbs down and puts the walnut on the bottom and takes out the moss. So the king is thrilled, and he gets, his uh, he gets what he earned for his curiosity and um, wit and resilience. That's one of my favorites.
That's a lovely story, isn't it? What's the
Yeah.
significance of the numbers, do you think? Things coming in threes.
I don't know. I've often thought about that. One thing you could say is it sort of plays into if at first you don't succeed, try again.
Yeah.
Or things are not always quite as simple as you think at the beginning, but it's still worth more tries. And something magical about three. I don't think three's in the Bible necessarily. I mean, I'm looking for any place. I can't think of where that comes from, but I think that's the point. Try again.
It feels like a natural number, doesn't it, actually?
It does.
Well,
It
yeah,
does.
we grow up with it, don't we? Thinking
Right.
that things come in threes. It's odd
Things
that.
come in threes. That's right.
So how can people um tell stories and pass them on then, do you think, to their children and their grandchildren? Do you think we should be searching out the stories, searching out the books, and creating our own libraries of them?
I do. I mean, I think the telling of folk tales and stories can be both formal and informal.
Yeah.
And the informal ones is usually reading to your kids, reading to your nieces and
Mm.
nephews, reading to your grandchildren, or read in a room where the adults are present too.
Oh, that's a lovely
And
thought. That's something that we never do anymore,
no,
do we, really?
I agree. And you can just imagine, something happens in the tale, and all the adults sort of look at each other, give themselves a wink. Yeah, we know how that goes. Oh yes, They don't even have to say anything, and the adults enjoy that because there are things at a higher level or at an adult level in a lot of the tales that children don't necessarily pick up on. Um, so um, I think either you start listening to podcasts. There's online. There's if you have a computer and that's something that people can do. I guess if they're listening to the podcast, they can at least get to something there. There are lots of folk tales. All of the Asbjornsen and Move Norwegian tales are available online. You can read them all the way through.
Mm.
That's one place. I have an entire bookshelf of things, and many of them are at at the local bookstore. And then you can just go listen to if you find places where you can hear them, that's also in reverse places maybe where you can tell them.
Yeah.
So I say pick a story that you like, pick a story that resonates with you that maybe reinforces values that are especially important to you, like me, is curiosity in nature. And that's the one you should lead with. And sit people if it's maybe recruit the adults. No, let's sit the kids down. It's story time.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's lovely.
yeah,
That kind of evokes ideas of people sitting around a campfire or a bowl panner or a bonfire maybe as well, those all those kind of traditions linked together,
I
maybe
agree.
telling tales 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago, perhaps.
Yes, yes. I agree. Yes, I love the image of being around the fire. There's something magical about that. I've been in, oh, I guess some summer camps where there was a fire and we sat around and someone started telling stories and you couldn't necessarily see the storyteller, but you could hear them.
Yeah,
And there points to another benefit. It stimulates the imagination. People go, okay, I understand what's going on as a picture in my head. It's not being ruined by video,
yeah,
right? Uh, and even the folktale books have um, illustrations in them, but
yes,
they're
like
not
processing.
that detailed. And I think it's a touchstone. Oh, that's what a troll could look like, right? But uh, I used to be a fan of the old radio plays. In the United States, we had the Lone Ranger, and they were always riding around on their horses, and someone's at the other end of the microphone with coconut shells. Clap, 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 clap. And I liked them because I formed images in my mind about the action. And I think that's a benefit. And they say if you stimulate your imagination, you memorize a story, and it has something to do with how you feel. That's great for your mental health.
Yeah.
And boy, do we have challenges with mental health these
Mm,
days. And lastly, in terms of mental health, it's been shown to push back or hold off dementia,
yes.
you
Mm,
know?
yeah. And it forces us to slow down as well. Slow down and think about what we're doing, be intentional. And how often do we say that when we read a book and then we see a film or some kind of adaptation about it, it's never the same as the book, is it? And it's exactly what you said about your imagination. You form this picture in your head of the characters, and
Yeah.
they're never quite the same. I mean, maybe occasionally, perhaps a couple of times in your life, maybe you might find that, the adaptation is exactly what you were thinking it would be. But I think on the
Yes.
whole, books are so much better.
I found the Lord of the Rings series to ring bells with me. I go, yeah, that's about what I thought Gandalf looked
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know, and because they follow the story very closely in my mind. And that was especially neat to see or feel.
Yeah, it was very creative, wasn't it? But again, that's kind of modern folklore, I suppose, as well. But pulling on some of those old traditions that I guess we're all familiar with wherever wherever we come from.
Yeah, I mean, stories are the way people learn. I mean,
Yeah.
even in the working world, if you say you got to this and this and this and this, and here's this process versus say you have a paper, it's got to go this way. How do you process it? What's the first step and the second step and the third step? People remember that more than just the facts, and that's certainly true with folk tales as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you find it's a little more niche, I guess, but how do you find they translate into English? Do you read them in Norwegian and Icelandic, or mind you, Icelandic's very difficult to read, isn't it? Swedish, Danish. Do you find that they translate well, or is something lost in the translation, do you think?
I think there is something to the translations. A recent
Yeah.
translation of all of the Asbjørnsen and Moe tales was done just a couple years ago, and the translator said I had to make choices like every translator does
Mm.
about which words to use. And she said, I've modernized it. Instead of saying, and the lad went off to find his fortune, I say, the boy, or I just say the boy's name, uh, not it, not using more modernized language. Now, the downside is if some translations may take away the rhythm and the
Yeah.
sounds, the once upon a time. I mean, there once was versus once upon a time. Maybe that makes a difference, that cadence and rhythm and classic language, right? We all
Yeah.
recognize it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite possible, isn't it? But maybe
Yeah.
not if you're not a native Norwegian speaker. I think it'd probably be
Yeah.
quite
And
difficult.
I do have the Asbjørnsen tales in Norwegian. Um, I still struggle a little bit to read them. I need my dictionary. And you're
Yeah.
right. Icelandic is impossible. And I've learned so is uh, hearing Nynorsk, New Norwegian.
Yeah.
That's really hard for me in dialect. But, that's what it's all about in this world is working to understand.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Um, I'm just keep it a bit less formal now. That was brilliant. Thank you. Do
Oh,
you want to do a kind of outro about yourself and um, your podcast?
all right.
And then, yeah, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I don't want to impress you for too much because I think we talked about this before, didn't we? Maybe it was somebody else I was talking to about, it's great to do the what and the why, but you don't always want to do too much of the how because that's something that then you want to draw people, to whatever it is you're either selling or talking about or whatever. But
Sure.
that was just fantastic.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, so I would encourage people to try telling stories. And if you like hearing stories, I do some on my podcast. I have a podcast that I make about every 3 months. You can find it at Nordic on Tap. That's the name of the show. All one word, nordicontap.com. And you choose among at the moment, there's about 35 shows. So besides the 4 or 5 folktale shows, the rest is me interviewing people like yourself who have some connection to the Nordic countries, authors, artists, other people doing podcasts, reaffirming traditions and language, and people I think are interesting, and I try to ask the questions that I think are interesting, but I feel like the listener is on my shoulder. And as the other listeners, I'd say listeners, I try to ask the questions you would ask. I try to find the people that you like to grab them by the ear. Hey, don't walk down the street. Tell me about yourself. Um, so it's at the moment, it's more interviews than it is folk tales, but I also play folk music of bands that actually are around here, around where I live. Um, and so I would love for people to listen to my podcast. I would love it for people to write me and tell me what you think. What would you like to hear? What worked, what resonated with you, and what didn't? And I provide that on the show. It's a similar nordicontap@gmail.com. I would love to hear from people.
It's brilliant. I would definitely encourage everybody to come and listen to your podcast. It's so in depth. It's just great. I love it. And the people you choose to talk to, it's like you say, the kind of person that you would walk past in the street and say, "No, stop. I just want to just tell me a little bit about what you're doing." It's some of it is really interesting. Like the couple that you talked to about the fjord horses.
Yes. Well, that's a special thing for me right now. Um, I met that couple at 17th of May parade, about 8 years ago, and I continue to see him and the couple every year on the 17th of May, and we'd go up and my children would climb up into his carriage. They had two fjord horses hitched to a carriage, and that's how they went down the parade route. And I learned that he had been a teacher. He had also been an accountant, but he really loved training fjord horses. So as you said, I have a podcast where we went down and learned about them. And what really struck me is how, yeah, I'm not horsey, but it was really clear that they had this connection with the horses.
Mm.
He said a couple times, I wanted to turn right. I was starting to think we needed to turn right, and the horses turned right. And I didn't say
Brilliant,
anything. I didn't touch them. And I just knew. Yeah. So what's special to me right now is a couple weeks ago, the man, Rory Miller, wrote to me and said, we're exhibiting our horses at Norway Day in Olympia, which is a happening with the Daughters of Norway. And I went last year. And he said, my wife has to go on a trip, so she can't be there. Would you be interested
Oh, how
in
lovely.
helping me show the fjord horses and talking about them? I said, I don't have to think about that. That would be wonderful. So I get to do that.
What a lovely opportunity. That's fantastic. They're lovely looking horses as well, aren't they?
They are.
I have to say, the last couple of years, I've seen an increasing number of them around here where we live in southern Norway. They seem to be getting more and more popular.
Yeah,
And up until about a year or so ago, I don't think I'd seen one at all, to be honest. I mean, they must be around everywhere, but certainly not out in the fields. But now, yes, they're all over the place, and they do look really impressive.
yeah. Yeah, I think they are becoming more popular. Uh, I mean, in the old days, they're great because you could plow with them.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
they're also supposed to be great around children, not quite as skittish as some other types of horses. I know there are some places in Norway, like up on the North Fjord, there is a district there whose shield has a fjord horse, and that's one of the subbreeds comes from Nordfjordeid up there on the North Fjord. So that's interesting. I'm glad to hear that. I think it's wonderful to see them. Yeah.
It is, isn't it, with these kind of rare breeds and dying breeds, you don't want them to be lost. So yeah, I like to see that as well. I think it's lovely. And like I said, they do look very impressive. I love their manes because they've got kind of two-tone mane. It's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah. That's what is really unique about that dark black hair down the center and the blondish hair surrounding it. So it's this black stripe, and the black stripe goes all the way down their neck, over and down their rear end. I mean, you go, what's that? Yeah, the black stripe goes all the way down the horse. Oh,
Fantastic. Well, yes, as I say, everybody should get over and listen to your podcast. And I'm going to put a link at the bottom of this episode so that everyone can see exactly where to find you. So
thank you.
thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Living a Nordic Life newsletters so you can get an email when I release a new episode. It's a quick and easy way to keep up with all things Nordic living. Please visit livinganordiclife.com. You can listen to Living a Nordic Life on lots of podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, and plenty of others. If you've enjoyed the Living a Nordic Life podcast, why not leave me a rating? So that's the end of Living a Nordic Life for today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.